Hello and welcome, peering soul, to the seventh and final entry to my digital sketchbook series. Over the course of our explorations of many worlds, we have seen the rotten desecration of an underground holy kingdom, the deaths and rebirths of old projects, the dawn that is beginning to rise after centuries of twilight, the dread of a dark, God-filled realm, and of course, the brutal wastes of a world forever scarred by the hubris of man. And that, peering soul, is where we'll end this series off on. A last founding look into stains of sin. This page in particular is quite the lore-heavy one, as it details the various ways neo-humans have harnessed the red of rosin, the very source of the world's state, staining the sky with its harsh hue and twisting the landscape and its denizens more than any other sin. But if the red is the cause for the waste's existence, then why would new humanity seek to harness it for themselves, perpetuating its profane prince which brands the earth and heavens? To many, the world is already a marred husk, and so ruining it evermore with the sin which destroyed it does not matter in the end. Power is all one desires, and the stain of man is one potent, yet corrupting source indeed. After the folly, the air itself became tainted by the red of rosin, turning it into the aptly named reddened air, which is toxic to breathe. Humanity was incapable of adapting to it fast enough, and so they turned to technology to ensure their survival. Ruins creatures, however, proved more resilient, evolving to respirate the toxified oxygen at an impressive rate, ensuring their own survival without technology. What is pictured is smog, which forms when rented air is concentrated into a dense gas, hanging like fog in places high in red energy. Smog is a hazard to all, including ruins creatures and machines, and if one is within it for too long, then their flesh will be stained by the red and their mechanical parts encrusted with black spikes. Be they a neo-human or ruins creature, then eventually they will either die or become a lesser red stain. Though smog is dangerous and should be avoided, that has not stopped the post-folly man in harnessing it for their own power, seen prominently once the Stain Wars broke out not long after the world became the Red Ruin. A rather straightforward harnessment would be with the smog exhaler, which simply stores smog and fires it out to coat the battlefield in red fog, sort of like a flamethrower, carried on the back and wielded by large immersion-protected soldiers. Since the Stain Wars were a free-for-all, civilian casualties were high, and I'd imagine these types of soldiers to trap enemy citizens in buildings and blow the smog inside, killing them slowly and painfully as their flesh is marked with the sin's prints. And why would this technology not extend to guns as well? This old world rifle, partially covered in immersion, was specialized in firing black needle bullets, which are filled with a bit of smog and would burst on impact, ejecting the spikes encrusted on its surface to puncture and stain the flesh of its target. This kind of ammunition then inspired the black needle grenades, based on the German stick grenades, and as expected, once it exploded, it ejected the spikes on its surface out while leaving a cloud of smog where it impacted, being highly effective at crippling and then slowly killing enemies in its radius. Smog is found in places of concentrated red, but what if humanity found a way to forcefully turn a location into a smog-shrouded exclusion zone? That is what this piece of technology does, the smog stake. Rarely used, but effective at forcing enemy troops to move to a specific location where then they will be ambushed and executed swiftly. First, it has to be planted in the ground and rightfully activated, where then it will emit specialized particles that forcefully condense the remnant air into smog clouds, turning the battlefield even more hazardous to those without protection, which the enemies of the smog harnessers sorely lacked. A rather peculiar-looking smog device is this type of throwable bomb called a red cell, which has been thoroughly marked by the red, and which contains volatile and highly condensed smog. After the pin has been pulled and thrown, the cell violently explodes, knocking soldiers off their feet and creating a large mass of smog where it impacted. But that is not its most lethal aspect, as the high concentration has caused the marks to burst out of the smog, slithering fast through the air and, if coming into contact with an entity, phasing through their bodies and instantly staining them, ensuring death or corruption. The last piece of smog technology we'll look at is the strongest kind of bomb humanity has developed for said smog, the smog mortar shell. Each the size of an adult man, the rounds are shot and fall upon enemy platoons. The burst shockwave powerful enough to pulverize soldiers and send them flying, with the shell itself leaving behind a huge smog cloud that spreads across the impact site, ensuring those who survived will die a slow death. The mortar itself would be big, towering over people and placed on high areas just far enough outside the battlefield to be safe from enemy fire. But now, with the Stain Wars long concluded, these mortars lie ruined, the constant firing of red-marked shells warping and melting it from within, red waste pouring out seemingly without end. Speaking of pooling red waste, here is a large container for said waste, once held up in a storage site but has now collapsed and is melting, revealing its marked interior and oozing the waste out into the ruin. Red waste, expectedly, is a hazard like smog, with it being a dense liquid as opposed to a gas. And like smog, if one, such as this new human, comes into contact with it for long enough, they will swiftly become stained. Red waste corruption is faster, as it is of much higher concentration and is closer to what the stain came from than smog. Red waste itself is metal and similar materials melted from intense prolonged exposure to red energy. And while normally it would only be found in specific secluded areas, the follies of man have increased its spread out of the ambition of creating pure red technology. And the heart of this, built post-folly, is the massive and ominous Black Factory, which was made specifically to produce red machines to turn the tides against the nation which harnessed smog, who will be detailed at a later date. However, like Rosen, they lost control of their production. All of the factory machines are, surprisingly, still functioning, even without any human input, though their coolant technology has eroded, and now all they produce is red waste. The machines closer to the outside are somewhat in better shape, but as one ventures deeper into the factory, the larger and more warped they become, to the point where it's hard to tell what they were originally designed for. Like petals blooming in spring, their metal bends and wraps around itself as their red nectar pools out, slowly melting the factory itself until one day it will collapse in on itself, forming a lake of red where it once stood. By and large, new humans tend to avoid anything to do with the red, and those who seek it are either desperate for power or turned mad by its prince. However, There is one faction in the Red Ruin who has become infamous for their harnessing and obsession with the Red Rosen, seeking all sources to claim as their own to fuel their rise as the sole militaristic force post-Stain Wars, that being the Rose Star Militia, a large, coordinated, and deadly neo-human faction that has become a scourge to all other neo-humans, either killing them on sight or crippling them before taking them away to experiment their newest developments on. The insignia pictured is when they were a player in the Stain Wars, being an ambitious militia separate from the smog harnessers and black factory makers, who believed that the Red Rosen was the key to an everlasting empire. During the Stain Wars, however, they were swiftly crushed, their remnants fleeing into the shadows to wait until the dust settled. Once the Stain Wars concluded with no victor, the militia slowly regained their strength and numbers, until now where they have become a truly formidable force in the Red Ruin. If you've seen the second entry, you may remember this drone, which sends signals to a faction once it has sighted an enemy, and it in fact belongs to the militia. At the time, I of course had no idea what they would look like, but during this page's creation, I attempted to depict them for the first time here, but I was not happy with it. The militia needed to be visually distinct from average neo-humans, and my idea with that is to make it so they have armor grafted onto their biological parts, making them look bulky and threatening. Though this design wasn't it. And so I pushed that aspect of their design further, making it so their entire bodies were covered in these warped petal-like plates forged from a type of red waste. This was getting in the right direction, but it now looked a bit too wretched or cowardly, as if the soldier is in agony and not confident in confrontation. The militia's posture should be more confident and imposing, as their red-plated armor is incredibly durable, capable of tanking bullets as the soldier marches towards their enemies. But I don't want them to look stiff, which this drawing did, and so I went at it again, until I got this design, which has a more dynamic pose and showcases their distinct firearms, which are also partially forged from red plates. This is what I was looking for, and the militia was now at a point where I felt comfortable drawing them in rough scenes, such as with this simple creation process for their plates. Molded in forges, pieces are taken out and promptly placed onto a neo-human, the intense heat melding onto them until it becomes a part of them, staining their bodies but not fully corrupting them, keeping them in a state in between to prevent the soldier from turning feral. For the most part, neo-humans who have sworn allegiance will be given these plates, but for captured neo-humans, many have them forcefully melded onto them in the process of turning them into slaves. Like simple robots, they cannot think for themselves, obeying their master's commands and sent into the front lines to test out the faction's newest developments. The militia's soldiers are defined by their brutality, mercilessly and violently executing most neo-humans they come across with their powerful red forged weaponry, spilling mock blood across the waste even when their victims surrender. They should know that such pleas for mercy fall on deaf ears. The militia has their goals set, and nothing will stop them. Such unfortunate neo-humans are broken, their inner technologies torn out of their bodies as they still live, collected to be used as fuel for their many forges. Even long after the Stain Wars ended, the horrors of battle are perpetuated in a world already scarred by past sins. Will there ever be an end to this needless destruction? Only time will tell. Peering Soul. And that concludes the final sketchbook entry. This series, while short by the standards of time once all is done, has been a lengthy one for me, and has ultimately served as a learning experiment for my art flow, world building, and video making. Now that it is done, the future of the channel will look a little more familiar to other world building channels, with me making shorter dedicated videos to specific topics of a world, from lore to design processes and brainstorming. Over the course of the series, Stains of Sin has gotten the most entries out of the others, and that is due to it simply being more developed and compacted than the rest, such as Dawnward, Beneath Mercy, Lorn, etc. I said early on that I would be making videos about 3 worlds: Stains of Sin, Beneath Mercy, and Dawnward. However, after making these videos and writing the lore for them, I've realized that I really should focus most of my energy on one, and make art or small developments for the others every now and then. So, going forward, Stains of Sin will be the main project I will develop, and the rest stays in the back burner until their rightful time comes. If I want these worlds to be as immersive, fantastical, and grand as I imagine, it's best they remain away until I get a clearer vision for them. I do not know when the next video will be out, but it will be a formal introduction to Stains of Sin, and I hope you will look forward to it. And now that all has been said for this channel's future, I bid you, peering soul, farewell for now. The Red Ruin will open to you in due time, and its innumerable perils and tragedies will show themselves to you without restraint when it is ready.